Welcome everyone. I've got no background music because I've got no laptop, so we're in silence. Oh, Roger's here already anyway, so I'm going to listen to me on my own for long.
I'm connected. I'm being told I'm connected. Am I
Yeah,
connected?
you are connected. We can hear you. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. Feeling great. Feeling raring to go, full of energy and full of vim and vigor. That's what I am.
Oh well. I'm assuming from what you said that you've had some okay weather there today. I mean, it's been dreadful here.
Well, funny enough, about just about half an hour after I got back, which was about 6, I think, maybe a bit earlier. Yeah, maybe a bit earlier. It actually tipped down, but only for a while, I think. So
We
yeah.
we've had that more or less on and off since early morning, 9, 10 o'clock this morning.
Well, it's because God hates Prince Charles, isn't it?
Well, to be fair, yeah, I mean, if there was any sort of like truth to that, you'd have to accept that as some criticism and saying, well, yeah, it's not fun because he could pick any weather, and if they've got all this power, don't forget their divine right to rule essentially comes from this sky daddy. So doesn't sound like there's much approval there.
Yeah, well, the royals don't really get on with their dads very well, though, do they, at the
True,
moment? So,
true, true.
there's
But
a bit
yeah,
of
I mean,
friction amongst the generations, you might say.
yeah, I always think. In fact, I think Benny shared a version of it earlier, but the I can't think what the proper name is, but it's basically a sphere with the cross in the middle. I mean, that the whole thing's all been integrated with the Church of England and all that stuff. That essentially is the Anglican God, Yahweh.
Well, yeah, but you can feel a little bit lucky. I mean, it's been a lot worse in Ireland, with
Yes.
I mean the Catholic Church was running schooling until recently and still does to some degree, and there's a lot of hangover to it, and of course there's been lots of scandals and all the rest of it, and so even I mean, I went on a march a couple of years ago. No, it must be more now, before the pandemic, and these Magdalene laundries were called, where kind of women in sin were sent because they'd had a child out of wedlock and all this kind of crap, and they were kind of beaten up and ill-treated by nuns and stuff. It was absolutely terrible stuff going on.
Hmm.
And the weird thing is, I think the last one didn't close until I think it might be even the 1990s. If not that, it was the 1970s. It's still relatively recently, in historical terms, and it's a bit shocking. I mean, I before I moved, I used to cycle past this bloody thing. It's kind of derelict now, but I used to cycle past it on a regular basis. It's a horrible kind of monument to rights violations and religious control. It's absolutely appalling things going on.
Yeah.
Hi, Colleen. Colleen's in the house.
Yeah, so I suppose we are quite lucky in that regard. I mean, we had a couple of mandatory trips to the local church for like, I think we went once at Christmas, once at Easter, and maybe once sort of like harvest festival kind of time.
Yeah.
That was it.
Colleen said something really interesting. This is about the coronation. So many Canadian celebrations, even First Nation drumming circles.
What?
So forgiving. Well, yeah, and don't deserve it. So I mean, that is forgiving, isn't it? I mean, kind of.
Very, very, yeah.
But I mean,
I've noticed, so maybe it's just, I don't know if this is reflective of the royal opinion or whether it's more based about Charles as an individual than the Queen, but I've absolutely noticed less interest in this than I did in anything to do with the Queen, to be perfectly honest. She always seemed to have the vast majority of support and then a few people that were disgruntled, whereas this time I'd say it's far more 50-50. It's the first time I've ever kind of felt quite confident to have my views aired in public, whereas normally you are the black sheep, so to speak. Not that's not the thing so much anymore. I've definitely noticed that the last couple of days.
well, I guess Elizabeth was rather a hard act to follow, really, wasn't she? So, in that sense, and of course, there's a lot of goodwill about the royal family in terms of the war years. And
Yes,
of course, they're a generation away from that now, and so it just doesn't
that's
work. I
true.
mean, a lot of them have served and everything. Charles was in the Navy and all that kind of stuff and all that, but it's not the same as being there in the newspapers all the time.
Yeah, no, that is very true. I've noticed that I suppose there seems to be a lot more correlation with Charles because of the Prince Andrew thing as well. I mean, I don't remember too many people saying, "Well, the Queen forgave him." That's a big issue for us, but it's the fact that Charles has potentially forgiven him is a big issue for everyone. I mean, it should be, but it should have always been a big issue. It's a big issue that it exists, let alone who's forgiven who.
Yeah, well, Colleen adds, amidst the many hundreds of bodies being discovered on the grounds of former residential schools. So, Colleen, are you talking about Canada there, or are
Yeah, I was
you?
going to say, if so,
Yeah.
I haven't heard about some of that. I mean, I do know a few things that probably aren't um, ready to talk about on here before the sort of watershed sort of time. But there are absolutely things about many members of the royal family going back, all sorts of atrocities that
Yeah,
people
but
wouldn't
I
think
think
about.
Colleen is talking about Ireland here, maybe because there's
Oh,
been
okay.
some, like a lot of babies were thrown into
Yes,
septic
right. That
tanks
makes
and stuff
sense.
like that.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I think that's the context of that, including the Church of England. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, Church of England is interesting because it doesn't kind of mean anything.
No, not really.
Yeah, I mean, like Eddie Izzard used to talk about that. Really interesting. It's kind of, a lot of religions are kind of, da 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 da, and the Church of England are kind of, if you don't mind, type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, actually, I think there's a line from Bottom the show where he asks Richie what his religion is, and he kind of says, "Well, you're not religious. I don't have to be. I'm C of E." As if,
Yes.
yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I can't even remember. I mean, see, I was well, I was C of E, so that means I was baptized. Does it? I
No,
don't
no.
know.
C of E is just essentially bog standard, like normal. If you went to just a state school, so to speak, normal public school, then the vast majority of them, if they're not Catholic, are normally C of E bond standard. Even if they don't take it seriously, they normally fall under the C of E bracket.
Yeah. Hi, David. David Hawley or Halley. That's a little bit like being a comment, isn't it? It used to be called the Halley's comment, and then scientists said, well, actually, we always call it the Hawley's comment. But there you go.
In David Live before, possibly, if it's the same one. But hi, anyway.
Yes, indeed. I've had an interesting day, Andy. I was out in a place called Swords, which is really weird actually, because where I'm living now, which is miles away from the airport, you can hear, especially in the morning, you can hear the planes taking off and stuff. And if you're out walking, you see them coming in. There's like a bit of a kind of mountainous area, small thing, but you can see them coming over that or coming around and then doing a right turn, all lining up for the airport. But this place called Swords is right by the airport, and yet you wouldn't have known. It was really weird. It was kind of like it was almost like too near to register. It was a bit bizarre.
No,
You know?
I know exactly what you're saying. Going back to the winter clean days, we used to have some customers right by Birmingham Airport. I'm talking like you can see the terminal through the hedge, and yet that would never be as loud as silly as it sounds as some of the places that were a couple of miles away. I suppose it's because by the time they've landed, most of the sound and all that sort of stuff's actually gone. It's the approach and the takeoff that are actually the really noisy bits, and that's when they're going up to speed or slowing right down. I suppose that's why it's much louder. But I do remember that. That's right.
Yeah, well, the place where I do dog sitting now and again, that's on the kind of takeoff side of the airport, and
Yeah.
that can be a nightmare. Like every 7 minutes, you get this roar in the sky and everything. And in fact, the owner of the place were telling us just today that, oh yeah, I've got something to tell you about Tom Reagan as well. Really, really interesting. I was speaking to Bernie Wright's husband today, and he was talking about Tom Reagan. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But he was saying that they've changed their flight plan, and so they kind of turn the planes on takeoff earlier than they should. They're supposed to kind of take off in a straight line and then bank. Whereas now they're banking early, which means that they're going straight over their houses, and they're
Right.
not really allowed to do that. So they're trying to stop them doing it, you know. I see Richmond's sausage makers are pulling back on plant-based foods. The fad is over. Yeah, well, this is kind of capitalism, I'm afraid, in the sense that there was this kind of. I mean, I suppose you could say the same with Marks and Spencers. I do remember that Marks and Spencers, really went into the. I think they call it plant kitchen. I think,
Yeah.
and there was, you even went into a small Marks and Sparks, and there was quite a lot of shelves full of the stuff, and then it all started getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's really, I mean, all that is really is the fact that the equilibrium is being re-established. It's not really a bad sign. It just means that because all of them did it all at once. So you got Marks and Sparks, you got Safeways, but then in Ireland you got Aldi and all that. They're everywhere, of course. But you've got Dunnes stores in Ireland, which you don't get in Britain, for example. And they all came in, and they all started coming up with their plant-based options and everything. And I suppose they really kind of just broke the market because there wasn't that amount of demand.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't heard anything about the Richmond thing to comment on it either way. But I mean, we are talking about a predominantly animal based company who were only ever, as I say, jumping on a bandwagon or getting involved in and taking a slice for themselves. Well, it's not the end of the fad because one company have ceased making anything. It makes no difference. I mean, in the potential future world, those sort of companies will either have to change everything about them or they'll be replaced.
Colleen saying in North America, apparently plant-based foods are increasing 3 times faster than regular foods.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to look at it as a grand scheme of things, it's
Mm.
definitely something that's on the rise, not the fall. One company doesn't really dictate anything.
No, no. I mean, it's a false metric. I mean, you've got people like people who run Veg Fest, the kind of festival people in Britain, and they get all the trade mags, and the trade mags obviously take an overall view. And I think the plant-based market is doing okay. It's just that they've all had to kind of slim back a little bit because they all kind of piled in at once.
Yeah.
And like I said, they kind of overloaded
Well,
the
the other
system.
thing you see happen as well for a few months every year after January is a lot of these shops will go and invest heavily for that month. They'll have twice as much stock as what they'd usually have. And then naturally, things like Easter or whatever start coming along, all the other natural holidays that fill the shelves. And these products just naturally get brought in less and less and less. It's only the stuff that's exceptionally popular that sticks around. And that gives a false kind of effect too, because people will say, "Oh, well, last month it was absolutely rammed full of this stuff, and now they've only got a bit, so obviously it's dying off." And it's like, no, they're just taking advantage of a particular month, but it
Yeah,
always
you've
puts
you've
a
just
false
you've just
negative.
got to look at it in the round, really. It can't just be done by, individual examples and this kind of stuff and,
High health
short termism.
content in plant-based products. Check the label. Yeah, there's a high rights violation content in all the other products, so I'd consider that as probably a bigger factor.
There's a couple of interesting. Do you have leather shoes? Do you have leather shoes, Andy?
Do I have leather shoes? No,
Yeah.
I haven't had some leather shoes for a long, 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 long time, in fact.
No, I think the last time I had leather shoes was probably about 41 years ago, I would say, something like that. I used to have a leather belt that I was reluctant to get rid of, but I did in the end because I mean I didn't even wear it outside. It was just a ridiculous kind of almost
Yeah,
like
I
a rough.
in fact a few years ago actually, not too. I'm trying to think exactly when it was. Had been about 5 years ago. I did find a belt, and it was like a pouch thing that once upon a time I'd kept a tape Walkman in, and I buried them on a dog walk. Because I wasn't really keen on the idea of like giving them to a charity shop or anything like that. So I actually buried them.
Yeah. A few vegans do that. A lot of them give them to charity shops and stuff, don't they? And it really depends on whether there's any kind of people going to a charity shop and they see it and it looks, oh, that's good, but it's not the
That's the
right size, and
concern,
then they
isn't
go,
it?
oh, I'll go and
Yeah,
buy one, right? And so that's the
yeah,
problem with that.
yeah. That's why I decided to bury those items. Yeah. I mean, there
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have been a much demand for this pouch because it was quite specific to a tape Walkman and it had like a bit where you put your tapes in and a bit where the headphones come out. You know, I can't imagine anyone would have really been interested in that sort of stuff anyway. So yeah, I buried them some years ago.
Right, Brian Edwards. Humans are naturally omnivorous or omnivores. End of story. Well, that actually isn't the end of story because it depends on what you mean by omnivores. Because when people hear the word omnivore, they tend to think, oh, that means 50-50. Doesn't mean that. It actually means that your system can take an amount of flesh products and be okay. That's kind of all it means. It doesn't mean that it has to.
No,
It
not at
means that
all.
it's okay if you do. In fact, even herbivores can tolerate a certain amount of flesh products, you know. So it doesn't necessarily mean what a lot of people think it means when they say I'm an omnivore, right? So there's that issue. And then of course the morals come into it. You go, okay, well we can tolerate flesh in our diet. No, not many people would argue against that scientifically, nutritionally, from a dietetic point of view. We can tolerate it, but then you've got the moral issue about should we do it? So, the can do and the ought we do are two different things.
Yeah, exactly.
But plant-based is so expensive. Well, you're not saying plants are expensive, presumably.
To be fair, some like for like replacements, kind of going back to the guy who mentioned the Richmond. I mean, sometimes things like that they are quite expensive, and that's possibly some of the reason that they don't expand these ranges at the moment because they are expensive, which is off-putting. I mean, I don't buy products that are expensive for exactly that reason. So a lot of the like for like sort of meat replacements and things like that, I would agree, are quite expensive in comparison to the cheap processed flesh options. But if we're talking about just plants, seeds, nuts, legumes, that sort of thing, no, they're not. They're the cheapest foods around.
Yeah, I think when they say plant-based, they mean in the processed kind of vegan meats,
Yeah,
aren't they?
and I mean, like I said, for the most part, unless you get these things on special offer, a lot of the like for like meat replacements are expensive. Absolutely, they are. But
Yeah, the thing is, though, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if only one company was selling all of it, it
yeah,
would be
they
it'd
could
be dirt
reduce the
cheaper.
price significantly. You're absolutely right. It's only because there's so many different options. I mean, in fact, actually, we was having that conversation a few weeks ago. If you go and look at the flesh bit of, say, something like frozen sausages, their range in terms of makes is actually less than the plant-based one. There's about 15 companies in the plant-based section trying to compete for one little section, and yet you go and look at the frozen meat sausage one, and there's nowhere near as many companies competing for the same space.
Yeah. Do you shop in Aldi, Andy?
Not very often because I can't deal with the car parking situation that surrounds the local Aldi by
Okay.
me. That really is the reason why. In terms of price and everything else, it's a good place to go. But it's the amount of people that shop there versus the fact that it's on a bit of a retail park in Reddit. It's just not ideal. It's kind of like a day mission to look for a space.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, there's a couple of those in Ireland. It's kind of like a complete day out type malarkey, isn't
Yeah,
it? To do it.
absolutely. The
Yeah.
size of the shop and the fact that there's also an Iceland and a Home Bargains all in the same little area. The
Mm.
car park can't cope with any of those one on their own, let alone the three.
You
So
know,
yeah,
queue
you
up for two
constantly
hours just
drive
to
around in
park. Yeah,
circles and road rage.
yeah. The yeah, because yeah, because the interesting thing about the Aldi in Ireland at the moment is that they've left a lot of the plant-based stuff up. It kind of disappeared last year. As soon as Veganuary finished, it disappeared. But I mean, I was in Aldi today, and there's still loads and loads. There must be just in their kind of frozen things, like the junk food stuff, right? But there must be about, I'd say, 20, even 25 different options. You got the usual things like McCartney sausages, but then you've got vegan sausage rolls. You've got stuff like battered sausages. You've
Yeah,
got
yeah. So sometimes I've tried their battered sausages and their sausage rolls because sometimes my mum will go to Aldi and she'll grab us a few bits. Those battered sausages though, they're a definite favourite in this house.
yeah, I got them twice because I think I heard you say that. I got them and I wasn't that keen. And
Oh
then
really? Oh,
I
all right.
I remember you saying, "Hey, that was pretty good."
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
We really we do like those, and that's one of those few things that actually probably would be worth going and dealing with the Aldi for. But yeah. I suppose it's just it's a preference thing. I don't know who actually makes the sausages, like what kind of if they didn't have the batter on them, what they taste like, sort of thing. But I think that's a big part of it too, because there's some of the plant-based sausages that I'm not keen on too. I mean, for
hmm.
the longest time, I just used to eat the Linda McCartney ones, and now I don't really like them at all. I think it's just because I just had the same thing for such a long time, and now there's other options.
Now, one thing I can't understand in terms of some of the comments is the fact that people are kind of like almost celebrating the fact that there's less options out there now by saying, well, there's less, plant-based, vegan-friendly options now. But that just means that you've got less options when you go shopping as much as anybody else. So,
Yeah,
I mean, there's nothing to celebrate, is there really? It's a bit weird.
not really. But I think it's just that false negative that I think they think that because there's potentially one less company making some less products that has an effect somewhere, as though like that's proof now that veganism is just this fad after all. Right? Well, no.
Delap69, what about dog food? Funny enough, I when I picked up someone to go to the demo today, they were showing me their new sack of plant-based dog food, and also their tinned ones.
Yeah,
They did say the tinned vegan dog food is pretty expensive, but when you buy it as a dry thing in a sack, it's not too bad. But it's to do with the size of the market, that one. I mean,
absolutely.
all you got to do in terms of things like it's expensive. If you think that the amount of flesh ones sold now, if that was flipped over and that was the amount of vegan ones or plant-based ones, it would be cheaper. It would be dirt cheap because you're cutting out in terms of providing, say, vegan meats. You're cutting out all kinds of things like farms and the breeding and the artificial insemination and the growing of the other animals by feeding them. Then you've got things like transportation costs, and then you've got the cost of putting through a slaughterhouse. None of that would apply to the plant-based version. So the plant-based version is more hygienic, and because it's not full of rights violations, it's superior on every level anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right. On that note, did you want to talk about that conversation you had today?
I could do, yeah. I was just seeing if there's anything interesting in the comments, but yeah, I could do that. I met a Turkish guy today, and it's interesting because the conversation. I think he ended up talking to me for about 35 minutes, but it was split into two things. Because first of all, for some reason, and I don't know why, because we had all the vegan signs out and everything, he thought that we were something to do with dog rescue. And so he started talking about kind of dog rescue, and I was kind of going, well, that's not really our thing and all this kind of stuff. But then he really wanted to kind of get into the nitty gritty of his thing, and he was talking about there was a couple of he was concerned about people leaving dog mess all over the place, and he said that there are some countries now where they actually take a sample of it. I mean, I don't know who's employed to do this, and then they find the DNA from the sample, and then that's matched to the chip in the dog, and then they find the owner. And so he was going, why can't you do that in Ireland? And I said, well, I don't know. So
I, I've al- I've I've already got some serious doubts about the legitimacy of any of that. So like I don't know what country they're referring to and how strict their dog chipping laws are, but like in the UK, it's illegal to not have your dog microchipped. But that database for a start isn't like central. So there's about 6 or 7 rival companies that have all got a different set of data. So like for example, I'm registered with one called Identibase. That's who my dog's chips with. But like say for example, Animal Tracker can't access Identibase's database. They can't see that information because it would break the Data Protection Act. So straight away, we've got no central system that you can access. And two, it's so vague that most of the time people have moved house 2 or 3 times and that dog's got the original house details. In terms of DNA, they don't even know what breed of dog the dog's chipped to most of the time. It's just a name and phone number. I mean, if that technology exists, it's totally being wasted on dog poo.
Well, he specified Israel, so I don't know whether that's true or not.
Well, I mean, if that exists, and it just seems that we need to have a complete revolution in this country because there's loads
Yeah.
of dogs that are being stolen and missing. That technology could definitely reduce.
Well, I think he raised it because he thought that's what our business was, and of course we were saying, yeah, but that's not us. And I did point out that one of the people there on the demo used to have a greyhound rescue center.
Yeah, yeah.
I think they had 30 greyhounds in kennels and this kind of stuff. And all that, but I said maybe you should go and talk to them because I'm kind of a vegan activist, but they were talking about things like oh, I've seen dogs being let off the leash and they go and attack swans. And I said, well, there are some canals throughout Dublin, and often you get swans nesting on the banks. And what the council and kind of just people who care do is they try and put some fencing around them, And I said the problem is kind of kids and human beings, not the dogs,
Yeah.
because the kids will go in there and they'll attack the swans. They'll smash the eggs. They'll try and
I mean, literally all of that falls in the remit of the RSPCA, and yet still it falls
yeah,
into
I
like
know.
people
That's what I'm
hands.
saying. The
Yeah,
beginning of this conversation, he wasn't getting who we were,
yeah.
because he was even saying things like, what would happen when if some elderly person had a dog and then they die? What happens then? And I was trying to remember that system that you were talking about.
Rescue backup RBU. Yeah, so
Yeah,
if that dog, that's a perfect example. So say if you, but this would only work obviously if the dog had come through a rescue. If they brought the dog from like a breeder or off their friend, then obviously there is no
yeah. Well,
RBU in
fair
place.
play. He was opposed to the kind of puppy mills and stuff.
But yeah, that would be a perfect example. Let's just say an old lady rescues a dog 7 years ago, and she's sadly passed us away tonight, and the dog's still with us. It's the dog goes back into the hands of the rescue. It kind of has always got that safety net. That's exactly what the rescue backup is there for. So the dog would either go back to a foster or something else, or it'd be a home to home adoption again. But the dog would be potentially covered. That's
Yeah,
that's what
the
that's one of the good things about RBU. That's especially when it's supposed to come into play, or not even necessarily passing away. I mean, sometimes people have to go to hospital for like 6 months and all sorts of things, or they
yeah,
have a
yeah.
car crash or whatever.
I'll go on holiday. Here's a point though. The person who run the rescue said that she believes that the people caring for the dog had the responsibility to kind of plan ahead in terms of their passing, as it were, and she thought it was better than what you're talking about in the sense that it would be the dog would be kind of passed on to someone that they already know, which would make it less traumatic. Do you think there's anything in that?
So I mean, obviously, I can understand the passing it on to potentially someone who's already in, or she's in the dog's life, how in terms of relieving that stress or whatever. However, I mean, at the end of the day, most rescues just operate on a policy of the best place for the dog. So if a family member is willing to adopt the dog and they pass the home check and it's a suitable environment, then obviously that would be like an everyone win situation. It would only be if the family member didn't have suitable accommodation and everything else, and there was a perfect home viable, that decision would probably go against them. It would always be on the best interests of the dog, or it should be.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's a case by case basis.
Case by case, yeah, and obviously, some family members don't want
Well,
to
yeah,
have
don't forget a lot of the times that these dogs end up in rescue for exactly the opposite of what we're talking about, because their mother or father has just passed away and none of the family want to take on the responsibility of the dog, so they dump in rescue.
yeah.
That
Colleen
happens
saying
a
that
lot,
my
and
family have
also
made
you've also
arrangements.
got the other real common one now is just a relationship breakdown. So like a couple have got a dog together and they split
Yeah,
up and one of them
yeah,
moves
that's
out,
and then
and
it
then
end up
that's
a
it.
big
Yep.
court battle. Then,
Hmm.
hi Laura. Anyway, before
Hi,
this
Laura.
gets
Hiya,
bogged
Paul.
down in dog rescue and welfareism, um, after about quarter of an hour, and me said, well, probably less than quarter of an hour, there's me kind of saying, well, look, this is not our bag, really. You ought to go and talk to the ISPCA and everything, and you talk about government grants and all kind of stuff, and then suddenly, because the banner I was holding was the Tom Reagan quote saying, the human rights movement is a part of and not opposed to um, the animal rights movement is a part of and not opposed to the human rights
Do you
movement.
not have your Mercy for Animals one?
You're a very bad man, you are. And so he also, as he read the actual Reagan quote, he then saw the sign at the top, which was vegan. He like, oh right, you're vegans, right? And so he changed tack then, and he wanted to know about, well, what do we do about rogue elephants, right? And I say, well, that's often to do with the fact that humans have encroached on their existing territories and their land and their traditional roots and this kind of stuff. And so, they're trotting along, as it were, on their traditional roots, and then suddenly there's a village there,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and
yeah.
yet they're the ones called rogue, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely that. And I mean, I think sometimes people forget, especially if we're talking about elephants, that and then their natural lives sort of invaded by us or left completely alone. That they can definitely live some years, and they pass this kind of information on from generation to generation. So yeah, I mean, someone could say, well, we've had this building for 70 years, but that particular herd of elephants might have been roaming for 150.
Yeah, I do get an impression that size matters in this sense. If you think about whales, for example, and then think about elephants, they seem to live at a kind of slower pace,
Yeah.
and they can meander through life almost. Now, I'm not saying that, oh, blimey, that means that they must have a boring life, because I would imagine, I think that's one of the things that we're very kind of prejudicial about them, that we assume because we've got PlayStations and all that we've got such an exciting life. But people point out that there's no way that we can fly like a bird or an insect, even change direction, mid-flight and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, you just look at a bird coming into land, the way that they're kind of all the skill involved, and then you think about dogs and pigs in particular with their smell capabilities, which are vastly improved compared with ours. So they're taking loads of information we don't even have access to, and then we go, oh, they must have such a limited life compared with us. I
Yeah,
mean, it's just
I mean,
sheer
this is it. This
arrogance,
is it. But I mean, just to continue with the elephant example, up until I think it was only about 25 years or so ago, we had no idea that they could swim like they could. Had no idea because we didn't. It's nothing to do with us at the end of the day. We only know the little bits that we know, and we just pretend that we know everything else. Our ignorance fills in the gaps so often. I mean, it's kind of like I've heard it argued quite a few times from specialist people. It's like, especially when we're talking about, say, badgers, what do they do for us? As though there needs to be some sort of hierarchy where everyone's got to play a role or a purpose. And I mean, yeah, let me turn that question around then. What exactly are you doing for them? What
Yeah,
exactly
but
are you
what
doing to
what do we do
bring
for the
them?
planet apart from
Yeah,
destroy
exactly.
it?
What is your contribution? If that's how
Mm.
you want to look at it, I mean, the humans are the ones that have got something to prove. Nobody else has.
Yeah, so I mean, I went through all the stats about our vegan world because we're interested in saying, well, eventually our interests and their interests are gonna collide. Kind of these rights bearers, their rights are going to conflict. And I said, yeah, that is inevitable. It's just that in a vegan world, we would encounter each other as rights bearers, and the first thing we won't do is reach for the gun or the poison and that kind of stuff. And I said, in relation to actual space on the Earth, I went through all that stuff about how many mammals were left and all that kind of stuff. I was saying that, we've probably got a responsibility now. We've probably, the human species has probably laid enough concrete down on planet Earth now that we shouldn't do any more. And so if we want to do any building and upgrading and all that, it should be within our concrete jungles and not kind of trying to expand them out. And he kind of accepted that and saying, well, yeah, because, we do kind of just willy-nilly kind of encroach on other animals without much thought, really. They're the ones that always got to give way.
Yeah, absolutely. And then to make things worse, we turn around and call them the invasive species when they dare enter a territory that they've roamed for the last.
I know, yeah. What a phrase, invasive species, and go, well, hang on a second, be reasonable here, Yeah. But I was saying that if we were a bit more humble, had a bit of humility, that would change our relationships with other animals straight away, because we would then start thinking about, well, even if you want to do X, is it a good idea, Whereas, humans don't do that now. They just think, okay, I want a new shopping center. I want this, I want that, new sports center and all that kind of stuff, So, yeah. And then he was asking about B12, which, so he was quite informed about issues. It's quite interesting. And so I went through all the stuff about, so-called livestock are now injected with B12. Doctors recommend B12 supplementation for everyone. I said it used to be regarded as a vegan issue, whereas now doctors see it as an issue for everybody, and that's to do with like the hygiene standards in society. For example, if you had a drink of water in the past, you would be taking microorganisms and little bits of plant material and everything in, which is not there now. And so our kind of hygiene standards means that B12 doesn't come into our system, as much as it used to.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we should go back to the good old days of typhus and everything, but I was just saying that, it was kind of like one knock-on effect of the fact that we've improved hygiene is the fact that we're not getting the stuff that we would normally get from, just having dirty fingers and, soil underneath your fingernails and this kind of stuff. And he accepted all that as well. Came up with a couple of interesting kind of scenarios. Well, what would you do about ants and wasps and flies and stuff? And I think a lot of non-vegans find the vegan response to that a little bit ludicrous, because the vegan response is caring and also willing to take the time. For example, I think vegans would be looking, obviously, where do the ants get into the dwelling? And also, can we transport them out without harming them? And because you were saying, well, what about mice? And I said, well, there's humane mice traps. And I said that what tends to happen there is that you catch them live. If you transport them more than a mile away, that they don't come back. But of course, that in a sense might just be moving the problem somewhere else. I just think in those kind of like scenarios of the vegan future, then we're into Tom Reagan territory, which is what we need then is people of goodwill to come together and fairly talk about the issues without any profit being involved, without any commerce being involved, just on the basis of what is just and what is right.
Yeah, I totally agree. To be perfectly honest, especially a lot of these times, obviously it's a case by case basis again, but a lot of these times, or a lot of these, whether it's insects or whether it's small mammals, whether it's birds, whatever. If in terms of like nesting in the attic, or you've got mice coming in the kitchen, most of the times, if you actually sit down seriously and think about it, it's just the speciesism that's the problem. They're not actually causing any problem. Obviously, in case-by-case basis, sometimes you've got rodents that chew through wires and things like that genuinely do. But for the most part, even if we're talking about a wasp nest, it's just inconvenient for you. It's not actually a problem. They're not. It's not. It's not like they're. They're sitting there deciding they're going to invade your home and take over and evict you and kick you out. They've just got a particular reason. Whether it's they're there to fill the end of the nest and that's the end of them, or whether it's they're there to look for warmth or safety or any of these things. That's it. They're essentially just trying to survive. They don't realise that they're bothering you. If you actually just ignored them, most of the time these problems would have no effect on anybody, and they could just be. It's only the fact. I
Yeah.
mean, look at through the some of the amount of people that will go around their patios and their back garden killing ants, and it's like, but you're in the garden. Just go away from them. It's not like they're crawling on your face when you're asleep in your bed. Like they're not doing anything wrong most of the time. It could just literally come down to the case of just leave them be.
I blame the horror films. Actually, Graham makes a good point. Mice in urban settings will often only come inside if there's a good source of food, and so there's two sides to that.
Yeah.
Is if we disrupted their traditional source of food, and then if we provide a second one. The same goes with so-called rogue foxes. Often we've fecked up what they would normally eat in terms of a system. All the hedgerows have been grubbed up and all this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and then we provide them with an alternative. And the thing about human beings, with exceptions of kind of societies like Japan, is that we just throw stuff.
Well, that's what I was about to say. I mean, let's put ourselves in any of these positions for a moment. Let's imagine that you've got two choices. You've got the old-fashioned that we get told most days carnivore. They're going to go and hunt with their bare hands and teeth and scavenge for their own food. Or there's a house down the road that's very messy. They leave stuff all over the place, and every day all you've got to do is essentially climb over their back gate and eat the things that they've left in their back garden. Yeah, you're going to do that because that's the easy option. It's
Yeah,
there, it's
and
guaranteed.
sometimes,
Yeah,
when it comes to foxes, they don't have any choice because
Exactly that. Yes, I mean a lot of the time, especially when we talked about this before, especially when they're like paired up and they've
yeah.
very recently had cubs, then yeah, if one of those gets killed, then the other one is kind of forced into a position where they have to go somewhere closer or somewhere more risky because they can't travel the distances they'd usually go because they've got to leave the cubs. So like there's all these different situations. It's why I don't like the idea of people saying, "Oh, we should interfere when there is animals killing other animals," for example, because you don't know the context of that situation. You don't know the entire chain. You only see what's in front of you.
Yeah, yeah, it's fair enough. Just having a quick look at the comments here. Jennifer, it's horrible. I don't know what that's about. Let me join.
Just reading the comments. He's saying totally genuine. I saw that video, Jonathan. I actually commented on because I don't know why, but that HS Tiki Toki or whatever his name is, for some reason, quite often pops up on my For You page. I saw that video and commented and said, "Make the connection." I did see that.
Okay, I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about?
So I'm guessing he's a fairly famous TikToker. He always seems to have very popular videos. Anyway, he's like a sort of like gym goer, influencer type guy. Nothing to do with
Uh-huh.
veganism. But he made a video. I think he's in Dubai or somewhere like that. And he made a video that basically he'd followed a truck full of pigs on the motorway, and like it bothered him.
Oh, right. Okay. Tell me more. Tell me more.
That's more or less it wasn't a particularly long thing, but I was just like, well, yeah, that's literally what our viewpoint is. You more or less mentioned that it's not something you ever thought about before.
All right. Now, don't forget, Andy, when I say tell me more, you're supposed to say, did she put up a fight? Anyway,
But, yeah, he didn't reply to me or anything, so like there was nothing else to go on. But it was just interesting to see.
yeah, do you want me to tell you the interesting stuff about Reagan?
Oh yeah. Oh that's oh yeah, because that's right. They haven't found those pictures, have they?
Yes,
Yay.
but not the ones that we were looking for, which was the scariest one. But they found other ones of their trip
Oh,
to,
okay,
to
that's cool.
Tom's places, and he'd organised a conference and stuff and all that. And but Bernie's husband was giving his account of when they went on a trip after the Late Late Show, and he said the actual recognition started well before they got on the plane. on the train because they were saying they got into a cab, and the guy goes, "I know you. You were on the Late Late Show, weren't you?" And Reagan goes, "Yes, yes, yes." And this goes all the way along down to what Bernie was saying about they had a kind of like a group of people around him asking for autographs and everything. But remember when we did our watch along, we were saying the research here is really bad, right? Now listen to this.
Yeah, you're about to tell me that they spent months beforehand.
No. but you're gonna love this, right? Is the fact that apparently Tom Reagan was absolutely crackers about playing golf, and when he was in the States, he took the party to this really posh golf place. You don't have to pay for anything, you're just a member, and whatever you want, you got, and all this kind of stuff. It was one of these really swanky kind of things. So when he was due to come over to Ireland, he contacted the Wrights and said, can you set me up with with a golf game? And so Bernie's husband said, well, I'm not good enough to play you, so I'll get somebody who's good. Right, and so they ended up having this really competitive kind of golf thing, this kind of internationally recognized golf course in Ireland, right? And and he said during the match he's getting these calls from RTE going, "We want you to come in because we've got some questions to ask you." Right, this is the Late Late Show researcher, and he's going, well, "I'm playing golf. You'll have to ring back later." And so they rang back later and saying, "Look, you have to ring back later. I'm only on the 9th." This kind of stuff. And then so eventually the golf round finishes, and RTE at this stage are so desperate they sent somebody out to talk to to Tom. And they went into this room or something, and Bernie Wright's husband was stopped from going in, and Tom goes, "It's okay, it won't take long because they won't be asking me any questions that I don't already know." Right. And so the research did actually happen in the end, but it's almost as though by looking at the show, it never happened at all, right?
Well, yeah, you'd think so. I mean, you'd think how did he get booked on the show in the first place though, without knowing at least the basics about him? Like, I mean, as long I don't remember them once talking about any of his books or anything like as though there was no research whatsoever.
Yeah, nobody's read as much of a single page. Yeah,
yeah, like because they don't mention, as far as I'm aware, nobody did. He's not even introduced as like an author. So, like, there's no mention of you wrote this book, there's nothing there. No, I wouldn't have thought there was any research. They probably spent that whole time talking about golf.
No, normally what somebody like the interviewer would have done is kind of a hold up, a couple of his books and go.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Normally that would be the kind of how he'd have been introduced, and you say this in your book, and no.
Graham's talking about plants having rights. If plants have rights, go vegan. Yeah, that's right.
Yes, yeah, true. That is true. Oh, was someone saying plants have rights? Well, I mean, it's not really a strong case to not be vegan, really, is it? It's a very weak case, in fact. So if we're going to give rights to plants as well, we've got some serious changes to make.
Most people's foods are predominantly plant-based, Graham is saying, which is also true. In fact, well, it's funny, isn't it? Because that farmer during the Late Late Show tried to use that against Reagan, didn't he? Because he said, "Don't forget that a lot of people don't eat flesh around the world," kind of thing. And the farmer said, "Oh, that's a terrible thing." But of course, there's no way that the planet could even
get into everybody
who was a flesh eater. You couldn't do it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny because he complimented him on how good he looked, considering he hadn't had meat for however long.
Yeah, I know, yeah. Plants have rights too. Well, you'd have to come up with a plant rights philosophy, because the animal rights philosophy doesn't cover plants.
Yeah, and I mean, just from a little bit of a heads up, best of luck with that, because it's hard enough trying to get the animal rights community to adopt the animal rights philosophy. So best of luck trying to get the world to adapt one for plants.
Yeah. So when you've written the case for plant rights, let us know. We'll have a read, and then we'll see how your movement goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. But I mean, we're just giving you a word of warning. We're not expecting it to go too well, to be honest.
No, I mean don't be surprised if you don't get a hell of a lot of support. I
No,
mean,
no,
fair play
prepare
for
for
putting up.
pushback.
Yeah, I think you might have a few people that disagree with you forever, staunchly. I mean, predominantly people that just mow lawns for a living have probably got an issue. Yeah, there's quite a lot of
You're trying to make us redundant, aren't you,
yeah,
mate?
yes, there's a lot of people that you're putting out of work. What about them? That's the problem.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? I mean, it's quite weird, isn't it? You know, if plants had rights and therefore couldn't be exploited or interfered with, yeah, there'd be a few people unemployed at that stage.
Yeah, quite a lot. Big industries just shut down overnight. No more tree surgery, no more grass cutting, no more pruning, no more hedging, no more picking, no more walking for the most part in any fields.
Well, it'd be a big boost for the breatharian movement, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the breatharian movement have to have a new committee every couple of weeks, maybe, um, on the grounds that the first one probably died within 2 weeks, and so they have to have a new one.
Yeah,
So,
that's always I think a risk. The breatharians,
yeah,
they don't last too long.
no, shame, really.
You don't see many of them in London either, or anywhere like that. They've always managed to live in like the Himalayas or something conveniently. You don't see many of them just scattered around in big cities. Funny
The
enough.
breatharians, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh,
They're always when they
that's
make the
because
videos, they're
the
always in like some beautiful surrounding in front of a lake or something. They've always just got this luxurious location that they managed to be in as well.
yeah, but the air is clearer there, isn't it?
Of course, yeah. Very lucky for them.
Yeah, I mean, if
And
that's their
they
food,
still can't make it work.
yeah.
Mm.
You can't be eating the contaminated air of London. What's the problem? I mean it'll be full of
But
diesel
to
from
be
the
fair as well,
coronation and
knowing London, if they knew that there was breatharians in there, they'd be charged some extra tax.
the air in London will be smelling of of horse shit today, I suppose. Did you watch any of you being a subject and a peasant of England,
No,
and did you watch
no,
any of
no,
the
no.
show?
The only bits I've seen are what people have reposted on TikTok, i.e., like people chanting, protesting. I haven't actually seen any of the.
I did see that the cops kind of erected a wall.
Yeah, there was a big wall apparently because they didn't want them to see the protesters.
It was like fucking Pink Floyd or something, wasn't it? It was
Yeah.
really weird.
Yeah, it was. It's very sad. I mean, at the end of the day, it's getting to the stage where I mean, there's a great video. I think it's the Guardian actually, funnily enough, have reposted it by just some random guy that's saying, "Look, it doesn't matter whether you're pro or against the monarchy. Everyone should have the right to protest. This is an issue. This is a problem." And it's absolutely true. Regardless of what your personal feelings are or where you stand, you've got to recognise that this is an issue for everybody.
Apparently, they weren't allowed to chant "Not my king," which I mean, if you heard that about another country, you'd go, "Oh, how backward and ooh, how undemocratic," wouldn't you? And all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, the other thing that's it's kind of sad. Not too long ago, there was obviously the riots and stuff that were happening in France and Paris, and they were like setting fire to things and you see all these people reposting this stuff saying this is what we have to do, but the actual reality is, I mean, as someone said in our show, I think it was either yesterday or the one before, we haven't got people that oppose these actual genuine, the right to protest. There's not enough people that care about that stuff. There's not enough people that are bothered about that
well,
stuff, even though
it
it
was
affects
very British, wasn't
everybody.
it? The French burned everything down, and then the English responded by wearing yellow t-shirts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what happened there.
That's that.
So,
Yeah, it's this is the. I mean, literally, think of how all the time, daily. In fact, there's one of them in the commenters now that call us too soft and say the problem is vegans are too soft. But it's like, hang on a minute, where all these skinheads that go around beating people up because they don't like the color of their skin? Why aren't they opposing the right to protest? Why aren't all these big groups and all these people that's rights are being infringed? Why aren't they against this? It's nothing to do with veganism. This is to do with your personal freedoms, and there's not enough people that care. There's not enough people that do anything. There's not enough people that are even registered to vote, for example. Even if they, literally, you don't have to care about any of the parties. Just go in and put a massive cross across the piece of paper if you want to. Just show that you're not happy. Just show that you exist.
Yeah.
There's so many that are just like, this is really rubbish. I'm not going to do anything about it, though.
I didn't see that comment, but what does it mean? Vegans are soft. In what way are people are vegans soft? You mean moral? You mean moral, or
Well,
you?
I think, I mean, in regards to some of the language, I suppose, when a lot of it is all about compassion and caring and extending kindness, I
Oh,
can to some
so
degree.
soft means non-violent.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand where the word soft comes from, but like at the same time, the actual strengths or whatever you want to call it, to stand up to all of this oppression is the opposite of soft, really.
Yeah,
It's the people that I'm talking about that are like, well, I don't agree with this, and I don't like this, and I don't support this, but I'm not going to do anything at all to stop it or oppose it. That's soft, if you want to label soft.
yeah. Well, there's a philosopher called David de Grazer, and he says that to adopt veganism is to you have to have an extraordinary strength of character and mind because you're literally kind of swimming against the tide, and it's easy to go with the flow, like most people do. It's hard to kind of go, no, I'm not going to just get sucked into this system of rights violations and of injustice. I'm going to, I'm going to turn around and go the other way. That's hard.
Yeah,
That's not soft at all.
yeah, yeah. You got your answer from Matthew. Soft as in vegans can't stand animals getting killed and can't take a joke about animals. So apparently that's soft.
Oh, is that what it is? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think vegans have got a pretty good sense of humor. I mean, I don't recognize this kind of vegans are all a bit kind of dour and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't think there's any evidence of that, to be honest.
No, no, man. I think a lot of us have got to have a good sense of humour.
It's the only way you can survive in a
Yeah,
non-vegan world, isn't
absolutely.
it?
It is. It is. So what? So they found some pictures of Reagan. Well, that's good enough at the end of the day. Even if they haven't found the ones on the on the fishing boat, that might actually turn out to be better. Maybe they
I know,
maybe
yeah.
that's fate that those ones of him on a fishing boat have been lost to time.
Can you imagine what all the non-vegans
I
are going
was,
to
I
make
was
of that?
about to say, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'd have been all that sort of encouraged to put them up anyway.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I
they've
know,
got
yeah.
to. So yeah, that may well be fate saying, look, don't worry about them ones. Have these instead.
Yeah, maybe it is. They are good quality because Ray is not professional, but he's a really good photographer because he was a big mate of Phil Lynott and his mother Philomena, and so he
Right.
used to go to all the Thin Lizzy gigs and stuff, and he would tape them and do the promotional shots and this kind of stuff. So they're really good quality.
Yeah, that's good. Have they enjoyed going back through it as well?
Well, I think so, a little bit. I mean, it's quite interesting. I was about to say something I shouldn't have done there, but so I won't. But in terms of it was a real shame that the people who went to visit Reagan weren't really the best people to go and visit Reagan. But we'll leave that to one side. I think
Yeah.
bracket that off. I think. But there you
That
go.
is a shame, but it is. I mean, I'm still very jealous. So it'd be nice to see them and potentially get them up and start building our own little archive.
Yeah, well, it transpired as well that Ray remembered about the fact that we talked about Reagan being on the Late Late Show twice, but it was before that one. So it was
Oh,
with
so
it
that
was
was actually the second time he'd been on.
yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
that's even more embarrassing. I was expecting that to be the first one.
Yeah, I
So
know.
they'd already had him on. I know potentially it wasn't Pat that interviewed him.
It was no, it was this guy called Gay Byrne.
Have they got a copy of that?
Well, I was asking about that, and we went into this big conversation because Ray's got this kind of interest in the music business and everything, and we were talking about how in those days they used to just tape over the tapes that they've got,
Oh no.
which is why there's some incredible kind of performances by people like the Beatles and Rolling Stones that have been lost forever because they were just taped over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was saying about he had this really rare bootleg of Thin Lizzy, and he left it in. It was a cassette, and he went and visited somebody who had this amazing sound system, but I think they got a bit kind of K-lied, and he left the tape. And when he got back, the friend's father had taped over half of it with kind of country and western stuff.
Oh, great, just what you need.
Yeah, I know. And so he took it to a studio to try and kind of clean it up and stuff in the days when it wasn't as easy as it is now. And he said the next minute I saw this kind of like these bootlegs flying around about Thin Lizzy bootleg and all that. And he said the first track on side 2 was still the country and western thing because they hadn't even bothered to take it out. And so, you kind of go Thin Lizzy, Thin Lizzy, Thin Lizzy, country western, and then it would cut to halfway through a Thin Lizzy song. And he said they were so sloppy about it, they didn't even bother taking the kind of mistake of over-taping it out. It was bizarre.
Yeah, no, that's a shame. Well, even if we can't find that, I think though, I mean, even though it wasn't Pat, that's still embarrassing that potentially that's the second time he's been on that show, and they were still that desperate to get the research off him up until that day, and they still didn't show any evidence of knowing a damn thing about him. I mean, even the introduction doesn't. It's none of those things really. But yeah.
Well, no, I mean, we pointed out, didn't we? There's 3 mistakes in the intro, even so.
Yep.
It kind of doesn't. Oh, I also asked Ray. I said, Bernie said that he wasn't particularly angry at the end and all that. I said, do you remember him kind of going, "Oh God, those questions and all that"? He said, no, he was pretty cool about it. He said this is pretty standard. He always gets this kind of crap all the time. So that was
Fair enough. Yeah, I suppose he's not wrong.
yeah. So Bernie was right about that, which is interesting. That he was kind of almost like resigned to being asked inane questions,
Yeah.
So, but I think that's why in the end the philosophers kind of gave up on the movement, Andy, because they kind of said, well, look, the media can't get it, and so why should the movement? I suppose.
Yeah, and all these years later, it's no better, is it?
No.
Nothing's changed at all. If anything, the media.
No, I mean the media is still terrible, and the movement is still terrible. So
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the media are probably worse now than they were back then. At least the media once upon a time did care a little bit about a story. Now now they don't even research a story, or they don't actually check a story. They just copy and paste someone else's version of it.
Well, there was certainly no notes passed on from the first show to the second show when it came to the Late Show.
No chance. Well, maybe his name. Might have his name there. But yeah, I know.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't actually know the story of how he got onto the first one. And so I suppose the fact that he'd been on already would kind of be an intro.
He would have been their go-to, I suppose.
Yeah.
Especially if they also would have known, I'm guessing from the first one, that he was a calm, gentle person. He wasn't going to lose his shit and swear or do anything silly. So he was reliable to go to.
Yeah, I don't suppose he ever appeared on Jerry Springer.
No, I can't imagine that would have been. Although even if he had, there'd have been people throwing chairs at one another behind him, and he'd just kind of been sat there with his arms folded, smiling.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I respect you for asking it.
Yeah, thank you for throwing that chair.
Well, yeah, whilst I don't agree with what you've just done, I respect the fact that you've got the right to throw the chair. That's fine. No, yeah. No, never to be replaced, sadly.
No, I don't think so. You're not. There's only one Tom Regan.
There is.
And
ironically,
that's another thing.
All of the things that he possessed and kind of carried out so eloquently are the vast majority of things that people like about Eartha Ed. The only difference is he's talking about rights and not welfare. But all the things that they normally warm to, i.e., he's so humble, he's so gently spoken.
But how naive is that to talk about rights in an animal welfare movement? So, hey, listen to this though, Andy.
That is though. That's the only real difference. I mean, the argument's definitely made, in fact, that he's a better speaker and all these other things too. But if we're just talking about the difference, it's only the subject matter for the most part. All the things that people seem to like so much about Ed, which I totally understand, he's got and better. But they don't seem to admire those same attributes in Regan. Even if it's the first time they've ever kind of like come across one of his videos, you don't see people going, oh, wow, like this reminds me of Ed, so to speak. You don't get that. All the things that people would use to describe Ed and say, oh, why he's so effective or so good. Regan's all of those things, and he never gets the same sort of accolade for it.
No, well, he was in black and white, wasn't he? That's the problem. So
Well, slowly we're colouring him up, so that's the problem.
yeah. Hey, I'll tell you one. This is interesting. We might finish on this. Is that like Reagan would always kind of say in interviews, "Oh, I'm married to Nancy Reagan," right? And
Yeah.
Ray was saying that the reason for that is that Ronald Reagan
Yeah,
and
did you?
Nancy
I
Reagan.
always assumed that because Ronald Reagan's wife was Nancy as well. Yeah, and I always thought it was like it's
Yeah,
not obviously the
but
real
that's why
one,
he
but
made a joke. But apparently, in the area where they lived, Nancy Reagan had some interest there. And so what they used to do, right, is that when they went for a restaurant reservation, Nancy would ring and they would go, "Oh, and what's your name?" And said Nancy Reagan. "Oh, Nancy Reagan." And so they got kind of years and years and years of free meals out of her name.
oh well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that would work though. You wouldn't question it, and she's not lying.
Well, apparently, what happened was when they got there and they go, yes, and say, "I've got a reservation," and said, "Your name, Nancy Reagan." "You're not Nancy Reagan." He said, "I am Nancy Reagan."
Yeah.
So it kind of like, I suppose they commit themselves to kind of giving them the best table by then and all the rest of it. So there you go.
It's clever though, and if it
It
works, it
is.
works.
It is rather. Right, young man, are we going to say goodnight to
Yeah,
everyone?
yeah, we'll call it a night. We've done our hour. Hopefully, everyone's enjoyed having us for a little bit. We were in an hour and about not being here, so glad we did it.
Oh, yes. Persevere and all that kind of malarkey.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we haven't got a watch along organised for this week, have we? We've got our talk on Wednesday. You've obviously got you and Ronnie on Tuesday. Is there anything
Yeah,
else?
and then I haven't worked out what the time tunnel will be yet either. So I think we it's time for another woman pioneer. I think, which might mean Janaway, I suppose.
Yeah.
I might be able to use some of your enhanced.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah,
Good time to showcase it.
yeah. Yes, indeed. Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for
Yeah,
tuning in.
thanks so much for joining us. Hope you have a good evening or afternoon or morning wherever you are, and we'll speak to you soon. See you later.
Bye bye.